and therefore too threatening. And that brings us to the next question. What are your thoughts on the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator as opposed to the Big Five? Well, Myers-Briggs was not generated with modern statistical technology and has all the lacks you'd expect. So it was generated as a consequence of its purported affinity for or identity with Jung's theories, although it's not a product that Carl Jung either used or produced or, as far as I know, approved of. Not to say that he outright disapproved of it, but it's not a direct consequence of his work on his domain. It's a consequence of inferences about his work from other people who studied his content. And generally that doesn't go that well, with the possible exception of Eric Neumann, for example, and a few others who I've put on my reading list, of recommended books, which you can access at jordanbpeterson.com under books, under recommended books. Now, the Myers-Briggs is widely used as a personality test. Why? Well, there's some things to be said in its favor. It does provide a relatively accurate index of extroversion, for example. It lacks neuroticism entirely, which is a big problem. And the terminology it uses is best replaced, and I'm saying this, despite my admiration for Jung's thought, it's best replaced with the factor analytically derived terms that are used in the Big Five and in the Big 10 aspect scale. So it should be supplanted by those tests validly to serve the purposes of valid prediction and reliable testing. Now, why is the Myers-Briggs so popular? Well, I think the reason there's two reasons, and they're valid reasons. The first is that it is important for people to understand that people differ on the basis of their temperament. That a systematizer, for example, who would be low in agreeableness and generally low in neuroticism, but low in agreeableness certainly, a systematizer does differ from an empathizer who would be high in agreeableness. That there is diversity in the way that people process the world, and that considering that diversity is actually useful if you actually consider the diversity, which is to be found far more in the realm of personality than it is in the realm of inalienable attributes. There's no reliable data, as far as I know, on racial differences in personality. So the diversity, inclusivity, and equity people are striving to include is actually to be found in the domain of personality and not where they're looking. And the evidence for that is crystal clear. So, and is it useful to have a diverse range of personalities in your organization? And well, that's a complicated question, because it's preferentially useful to have a very large number of conscientious people in your workforce because they get the job done. Now, conscientious people do tend to be a bit more conservative because they also tend to be orderly. And so they might not be as open to new ideas as those who are not inhibited to such a degree by orderliness. So it's the absence of an impediment rather than the presence of a feature. But we don't understand the relationship between openness, which is the creativity dimension, and conscientiousness well enough to make more differentiated predictions. So anyways, is it useful to have a diversity of personalities in your workforce? Well, insofar as having a diversity of personalities in your workforce enables you to understand the target market, which includes a diverse range of personalities. And insofar as having a diverse range of personalities has been useful for the general human enterprise, which is why it's been selected for, it's possible that it's useful for your organization. But that's still somewhat problematic claim, given that the evidence suggests that a preponderance of conscientious people is very helpful if you want to undertake what it is that you plan to undertake. And then the open people might be necessary for vision, and more emotionally stable people for resilience, and more agreeable people to understand and empathize with everyone within the organization, but also with the general community, and disagreeable people who, because they'll tell you what they think and work as whistleblowers by bringing things that will produce conflict to your attention because they're not conflict averse. These are very complicated matters. Now, what the Myers-Briggs temperamental inventory does, or personality type indicator does to the dialogue, is bring it up fundamentally in a non-threatening way. So you can administer the Myers-Briggs, and while you're doing that, you can inform everyone that temperamental differences exist and that they matter and that they're real, and you can get the dialogue going, and no one gets offended by their Myers-Briggs personality type categorization. And so I tried to market a neuropsychological battery that involved the cognitive operations of the prefrontal cortex. That's what it tested, as well as assessing conscientiousness. I tried to market that to corporations for about 20 years, and it was, except in one case, a dismal failure. And the reason for that was really, I'm telling you the truth, is that it was too accurate. And so one of the things would happen is that the manager that I was speaking to would want to take the test, and he would generally score somewhere around the 50th percentile, which doesn't mean he got 50% on the test. It meant that he did as well as the average manager, which is what you'd expect the average manager to do. That meant he was better than 1 out of 2 managers, which is actually pretty good. But he'd look at it and he'd think, well, I'm 50th percent. I got 50% on this test because he wasn't statistically versed. I got 50% on this test. Well, it can't be accurate because, of course, I'm a good manager, well, which being better than 1.5 managers makes you. How can I rely on this to select people? Well, maybe you want to select people who are better than you are, but maybe you don't, because that is threatening. And it is a test that actually ranks people on the basis of their merit in relationship to a job, especially your job, is actually extremely threatening. And what we found, despite our repeated attempts, was that it was so threatening that people were loath to use the test, even though we could make a case for its unbelievable economic advantage. So it's so advantageous to hire better people than to not hire them. Then there isn't a single decision that you can make in your company that's more important than who you hire. And the economic utility of even small improvements in your hiring process is absolutely overwhelming. And that can also be demonstrated mathematically, but that means that the person you're talking to has to be able to understand and open to mathematical arguments and also buy your story, which they aren't necessarily prone to do. It also means that the person you're talking to who's doing the selection has to benefit directly, or at least not be punished for, improving the selection process. And the way that most corporations are set up is that those who accrue benefit from improving the hiring process are not those who are in control of the hiring process. So the incentives are lined up in a perverse way. So, for example, many of the people that I was negotiating with, they would tell me they couldn't pay for the test. I'd say, well, this test has a 500 to 1 return on investment. What do you mean you can't pay for it? It's not like we were charging an arm and a leg, by the way, either. Well, I get evaluated on the cost side, and the benefits get evaluated on someone else's watch. Well, then I'm dead in the water, aren't I? Because there's no argument that I can make that will convince you to use the test, because you'll be punished for its shortcomings and someone else will be rewarded for its benefits. End of story. And we never did market this product successfully, despite 15 years of work, much of it published in the scientific literature. So anyways, back to the Myers-Briggs. Well, it's a non-confrontational way of introducing discussion about personality into the workforce. And so it's to be lauded for that. And it does provide people with some information. Well, it certainly provides them with information that there are differences in personality. And that's a useful pedagogical contribution, let's say. So thumbs up to the Myers-Briggs people for that, for making a test that people could bear using. Now, the problem is that it's not the most accurate test. The most accurate test, as far as I'm concerned, and you can for those of you who are able, you can decide whether this is a valid claim or not, is the understandmyself.com personality test, the Big Five, the 10 aspect Big Five, 10 aspects / Big Five markers. And that paper, by the way, has been cited. I'll just look in Google Scholar here for a minute. The paper that Colin DeYoung, who was a student of mine at the time, wrote, along with Daniel Higgins along with Lena Quilty, my mistake. Daniel Higgins is my partner in the business and also a co-author on the next 3 most highly cited papers that I've been associated with. Anyways, the paper is Between Facets and Domains, 10 Aspects of the Big Five, and it's been cited 1,700 times, where the median citation, it's been cited a lot. It's the highest citation count paper I have, and 1,700 citations is a very large number of citations. That would be a moderate career level citation for a moderately successful researcher, rather than just the citation count for one paper. So people do have some regard for the 10 aspect theory, and increasingly so. That means there are more and more papers published using it. So if you really want to know what your personality is, I would say use Understand Myself, and then you can also understand your coupling better. If you want a non-confrontational introduction to the idea that personality diversity exists, then use the Myers-Briggs, but it isn't going to give you the most differentiated information that you can have. So I guess if I was pushed, though, and someone from a corporation said to me, well, which one would you recommend using in the corporate environment? Well, I'd make 2 cases. I'd say, well, if you want to avoid conflict, use the MBTI. If you want to help people understand their personalities and use an accurate instrument to do so, for whatever cost that might have as well, then use the 10 aspect scale, because it's the most accurate and differentiated personality measure that exists, as far as I'm concerned. The Hexaco model is great. And a standard Big Five, like the Neo-PIR, is also, these are good instruments. It's not like it's the only one, but I think it's got the stats right at the most fundamental level, and it offers the most differentiation. So it gives you the biggest accuracy bang for your buck if you're interested in accuracy. And it doesn't take very long. It's 100 questions, and you can wrap them off pretty quickly. And you get a lot of information about who you are. That's useful as far as I'm concerned.